Hello, everyone, for another episode of Behind the Headlines with the Shills. I'm so happy to see all of you in the chat and all of our listeners out there. Hello. So today, it's no secret, we have Commander McMillan.
Hi, sports fans.
In the past couple shows, we've had people and I've always wanted to do a stream with Commander McMillan, so you get to know him better. I want to get to know him better, but he and I have been friends, I think, for about a year now. I want to thank Nick Suter, when he watches the program, for introducing us, because met Commander on the In Time show that Nick was doing, and we would talk about news and fun Navy stories and everything like that. And I want to have everybody not just talk about the news and current events, but also get to know Commander kind of like I know him, because he's truly a pretty funny guy. He's been on a few of our pub chats, and it's just a joy to have you here. I do want to make a quick announcement. We usually do a fundraiser during the stream, and I'd like to highlight Janine Terblanc. She was on the last show we had, and she just finished a fundraiser. We're going to be dropping her community link tab. Or Janine, you can go ahead and drop your own links. I'll let you work today. But Janine actually just finished a fundraiser and got walkie-talkies, and she's going to be posting, or if she hasn't already, a community post about that. But she has a new fundraiser for the same battalion. They need a solar panel for their Starlink. And I also encourage you to consider donating to Janine herself. She works 12, 13-hour days, plus she does her fundraising, plus she does other things for people in Ukraine, where she is right now, and she's with the Magic Food Army. She has a ton of responsibility. So help her out, help her guys out, because she does follow through, and she does show you where all the money goes, and it's definitely a great cause for her. So that's who I'd like to promote today. So, Commander, I'm going to turn this over to you, and I'm just going to let you run with it. So I asked Commander to put together a little cheat sheet for us, and so he can tell us about his background, how he got started in the Navy, what were his motivations, and then we'll go on to a couple of stories. And we also have a fair amount of questions that I got in from people, so we're definitely going to be taking viewer questions. We do have a room in the Shills Discord. Our team can drop the link there, and there's a room called Questions BTH. I put a link in the general chat there. You can put them in there. You're more than welcome to tag at the Shills in the chat, and go ahead and put the questions in there. If we don't get to your question, don't be offended. Commander is going to be answering some questions during the show by typing out answers. So, don't feel bad, because that's the one great thing about Commander is he's very thorough. He'll not answer your questions on air, but he'll definitely get to your questions anyway.
It beaten into me over the course of 25 years to be thorough, so I try to follow through.
I know. I was an inch shorter for getting beat on for a few years. So, Commander, your stage now.
Okay, a little bit about myself pre-Navy. My father was a career Foreign Service officer with the U.S. Diplomatic Corps. Foreign Service. Everybody get the wink there? Yeah, 3-letter federal agency that we don't talk about? Yeah, that one. Anyway, I was born in Japan and lived pretty much all over the world growing up. So Japan, India, Egypt, Greece, Turkey were all countries that I spent at least a year, sometimes as many as 4 years living in. Only place I ever really experienced culture shock is on the rare occasions we come back to the U.S. and I'd go, this is really strange. I went to various array of different schools. So, for example, when I was in India, I attended schools that had been for the elites of the British Raj, because this was fairly soon after India became independent. And, there were still those schools. So it was all the very upper crust Indian families would send their kids to these schools and they'd be taught in English. And there were, a handful of English speaking non-native folks that would go there as well. When I went to school in Egypt, I was one of like a half dozen day students at what was a boarding school for the children of missionaries whose missions were in sub-Saharan Africa. So the kids stay at this boarding school, and then during the summers they go fly down and join their parents for the summers and then come back to the boarding school. So those kids would do just about anything to get invited for dinner off campus because they had a very limited budget and the food was really bad. I don't know if you've ever had unsweetened Jell-O before. That was a staple for dessert, and boy, it was lousy. Anyway, so that's me growing up. I graduated from a very small U.S. Department of Defense school, high school in Turkey. It was the largest graduating class that school ever had, and it was only 31 people. So that gives you an idea of the kind of places I grew up and the communities I grew up in. Very small, insular little communities. I never mastered any of the languages from the countries I was in. I would learn to speak Pidgin childhood versions of the language so I could get around and buy stuff at the sweet shop or what have you. But never got good enough to actually say I was fluent or even remotely approaching fluency. I went to college at a number of different places in the country and ended up finally graduating from UC Santa Cruz with a BA in history. Shortly after graduation, I got a job as a, quote, management trainee, unquote, at a building maintenance and janitorial company. And after holding that job down for about a year, I quit because their idea of management trainee and mine were very different. I was getting no training in management. I was basically getting paid a salary that worked out to less than the hourly wage people on the cleaning crews. And my job was to come in an hour before the cleaning crew would go out to do something, load the vans and put all the supplies in. And then when we got back from a job, we'd they'd leave and I'd spend another hour cleaning up. So it was a great thing for the company, but it was crappy for me. So I quit and looked for work for about 6 months, doing odd jobs for friends. But having no success in finding extended employment. And eventually one day I saw an ad in the paper said government management positions. I thought, oh, that looks promising. And I dialed the number and the phone was answered, Navy opportunities. And I literally came that far from hanging up on them. And the rest, as they say, is history, because I ended up talking to the recruiter and going in, getting interviewed, taking various tests, and then went to OCS in Newport, Rhode Island, where I got commissioned as an ensign in 1980.
So what was your motivation to actually make that call? Just because you were so dissatisfied?
I was looking for work. I'm serious. That's all it was. It was not, I wanted to join the Navy, patriotism, good pay, whatever. It was, I'd been looking for work for 6 months and hadn't been able to find anything. And I was just blind calling numbers in the help wanted pages. I found out later from friends who had worked in military recruiting that there's a name for that, and they just post those in there and they say, we get a half dozen calls off of them, but some of them pan out, and that's all it was. I panned out for some recruiter.
So what made you decide on the Navy versus other branches of the military?
That was the ad.
Oh, it was literally
I mean,
just
seriously,
the ad.
it didn't say military or Navy. It just said government management positions. I figured it was like, Forestry Service or Department of Agriculture, anything. I didn't care. And, Navy opportunities. Oh, well, this does not sound like what I want to do. But I talked to the guy, and here I am.
So what did your parents think about your decision? For enlisted, if you're in a military family, it's just following tradition. But for me, I was the first person to join the military in our family besides my grandparents, great-grandparents, aunts and uncles that had military, but they were in during wars, so they almost didn't have a choice. But what did your parents think about your decision?
I don't think they particularly worried or cared one way or the other. It was like, it was a job, and I don't think they anticipated I'd make a career of it. I thought that my impression was they felt I'd probably go in and do my 4-year commitment and then get out, go work in the civilian sector. But honestly, the way the career worked, I had a damn good time. So that's why I stayed in for 25 years.
So what was your first duty station?
Technically, it would have been OCS, Officer Candidate
After
School.
OCS. Mm-hmm.
Right. After OCS, well, let me take a step back. The Navy for officers has a number of different career paths. I was what's called a surface warfare officer, or as we like to jokingly say, a ship driver. There are also aviators, Tom Cruise and his F-14 on the carrier kind of thing. And there's submariners, and there's not a lot of cross-pollination between these career paths. I mean, you'll meet people and they'll be on ships that you're there, but they have very different progression through their ranks and the jobs and so forth. And so I was a surface warfare officer. And I want to give you a little anecdote here, which I think is amusing, to give you a little bit of insight into the minds of people in those different career paths. So much later in my career, when I went to Staff and Command College, they had each of the different services have a pre-meeting before we started for administrative purposes with all the people. So mine was, with the Navy, and they have one for the Air Force, one for the Army, one for the Marines, etc. And we were supposed to show up for this meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning. So I showed up at 7:30, and over the next 10 minutes, all the other surface warfare officers trickled in a good 20 minutes before we were supposed to be there. Then perhaps starting 5 minutes before we were supposed to be there, so like 7:55, the Judge Advocate General Corps, the Civil Engineering Corps, Supply Corps guys all kind of trickled in. At exactly 8 o'clock, en masse, all the submariners arrived. And then over the next 20 minutes, the aviators kind of trickled in 20 minutes late. That's kind of the mindset of the different career paths. So the Navy, in terms of those different career paths, you get the surface warfare guys, everything is, you schedule it and plan it well in advance, and then you execute it. And you always try to get there early because something, the sea conditions are going to be bad, so you'll arrive a little late because the sea or something else will happen. So you're always trying to be there in ahead of whatever the event is. The other non-line corps, the judge advocate folks and everything, to them it's like, yeah, we have to be there at 8, so we'll get there just before. We don't need to be there early. It doesn't really matter. The submariners, everything for a submariner is on a checklist. Literally, you wake up in the morning, you pick up your clipboard and put on underwear, check. Put on socks, check. Wash face, check. And that's their mentality of going down. Everything has to be completed with a checklist. Why? When you're working with a nuclear reactor, you follow that checklist religiously so that you don't have the incidents like the Russian Navy seems to have on a regular basis with their nuclear subs. And then the aviators, it's like, who cares? We'll get there eventually, and everybody will wait for us. So anyway, I just thought that was kind of amusing. So I was a surface warfare officer. After coming out of OCS, I got assigned to a old frigate. It was old enough that it actually had been commissioned originally as a destroyer escort and then redesignated to the more modern term that you hear these days, which is frigate. Frigate or destroyer escort is just that. It's a small ship, but it's still an ocean-going ship. Now, primarily, they're focused on one mission area. Typically, for the U.S. Navy, that tends to be anti-submarine warfare. So they're anti-sub ships. And I was on there for 3 years. Technically, it was a broken assignment, but that was normal at that time, where you'd be on the ship for 6 months, then they'd send you for 6 months special training as a surface warfare officer, and you'd return to the same ship you had left. I was the electronic maintenance officer, and then after I came back, I was communications officer aboard that ship. And then after that, I got another division officer tour to one of those big, looks like a miniature aircraft carrier amphib ships. I was on there for 2 years. And then technically, most people at that point in surface warfare would rotate ashore. And that's the normal surface warfare progression, where you do a couple of tours at sea, then you come back and you get a short tour, and then you go do another couple tours at sea, and you come back and get a short tour. I enjoyed being on sea duty so much that I kept volunteering to go back to sea, and my first 13 years of my career were all sea duty, which was very unusual. I don't think I met anybody else that had really that kind of a career progression.
Let me ask you a quick question. Going back to the ships, so the first one, destroyer frigate.
Yeah.
Were you guys alone out there, or were you actually part of a battle group, or did you do battle group exercises?
It varied. These days, typically, frigates, destroyers, and cruisers get assigned to a carrier group. Back then, I came into service at the start of Reagan's build-up for the vaunted 600-ship Navy. Those who were around back in those days will know what I'm talking about. It was a political selling point to get him elected. And so we got this massive influx of new people. We also got a massive influx of new ships that they started commissioning right during that period. And so with almost double the amount of ships that we had previously, they started sending out individual ships or ships in smaller groups that didn't have a carrier, 3, 4 frigates or destroyers or what have you. And on that first ship, my first deployment was not as part of the carrier group. It was just with, I think, 3 other ships, smaller destroyer-sized ships. The next time I deployed on that ship, we were with the carrier group. And that's kind of the way that went back then. And eventually, when the wall came down and Soviet Union, folded up, that 600-ship Navy very rapidly got reduced to just over 300. And that's one of the reasons I didn't get command of a ship, is because I had come in with all those people where we assumed we were going to have this 600-ship Navy for the foreseeable future. And all of a sudden, all those ships disappeared, and you had all these guys who were in the pipeline to get, their own commands. And they were literally offering people lump sum payments to, we'd like you to resign your commission and get out of the Navy.
I remember that, because that wasn't just officers, it trickled down. They were giving early outs to enlisted people.
Yep.
And I wasn't one of them because I was a specialty, but I remember those days. And it was it was a momentous thing that people were just like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? But people who did really want to get out, they did get out. So going back to, I remember when you were telling me about your career and you said, I love the sea and I wanted to stay on the sea. Tell us both, so our viewers know what you loved about it, but also why people, or why you wanted to stay on the sea, but also why people really didn't want to be on the sea. I know the reasons, but I'd like everyone to hear it from you.
Sure. So for most people, sea duty was kind of an owner's obligation. You knew you had to go to sea. It was part of the job, but they didn't like it because you had to leave your family and friends behind, and you'd be gone for, when you were on deployment, 6 months. But even if you were just in the local vacates or SoCal training areas, you'd be gone for 2-3 weeks at a time. And this is all pre-internet and pre-cell phone and everything, and you had no way to talk to these people. Today, you can send emails to people. If you're close in enough, you can use a cell phone and call ashore and talk to your family or what have you. But back then, you couldn't do that. So there was, to most people, a really enormous sense of isolation when you were at sea. And when you were on deployment, for example, the only way to communicate was either a very expensive phone call when you pulled into port, or you had to rely on written mail. And the mail often did not arrive in timely fashion. In fact, sometimes the mail would arrive out of sea. What sequence you had sent them. So if they got them out of sequence, they get 1, 2, 6, they'd know, 3, 4, and 5 are still coming. And that would often happen.
Let's hope that the breakup letter didn't come before the other ones. I think I still love you letters, but that's what Commander's saying about the phone calls is true. And if somebody was actually able to use a phone on a ship, I knew some people that could, just because if they were like right-hand people to the captain, but also phone calls were monitored back then. And so typically you'd if you were on the receiving end of a call, you'd be like, oh gosh, where are you? That's like the first question. Click. They will just click you off because it's,
we don't need to have you talking to anybody.
You don't even have to be in a war situation. You could. They just do not want movements. They don't want locations and movements, and that goes back to the beginning of time with the military. So, it really is. The other thing is some people just don't get their sea legs, and if you know what sea legs are, it's like when you get on a ship for the first time, you're horribly sick for days or maybe sometimes a week.
Oh, that never happened to me. That wouldn't possibly be why they used to call me Ensign Ralph-O-Matic.
Oh, gosh.
Originally, on that first ship, it was so bad that as soon as we'd get underway and pass buoy 1SD, which is the buoy marking the entrance to the port in San Diego, I'd get sick. So I had to walk around with my own little private barf bag stuffed in my belt.
It's not. It is so not fun. I never got over being. I only did a very short fill-in stint on a medical ship just because this woman she had to go out early for her pregnancy leave, and I filled in a little bit for a couple weeks. But I could not get used to the motion, and I'd get sick. But the worst part was, and I don't know if this was that common, but I would wake up at night sick and I couldn't make it off the cot. I would just be like, and it was horrible. So no, I was in the Navy, but I was not made for the Navy at all. But let me go. I do need to do a couple shout outs here. so we catch up. In the beginning, actually, before we went on air, UTV and Ham has been a great listener. I'm very loyal to being with us all the time. Thank you. He gifted a Shills membership. Yay, we have a new brother or sister. And Bob Doggy, let's see, 199 pounds, lurking garden catching vitamin C. Great. All right. I'm happy you're listening. So let me see here. We do have, so I want to go into some of the funny things.
I wanted to address a couple things that people have written in the chat stream here.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Back then, they did not have cell phones on ships. The only way to communicate ashore was either through the ham radio network. So if you had somebody who was a ham operator on the ship, they could get on high frequency and try to call and bounce the signal off the ionosphere to talk to people back in the U.S. And then somebody in the U.S. would call your family or wife or what have you, so you could talk to them. And it was really funny because hello, honey, over. How are you, over? But that was the only way. Or you could send telegrams via Navy message system, but it was fairly expensive, so people only did that in case of actual emergency stuff. It's your mother is in the hospital, she fell and broke her hip, can you come home, that kind of thing. But beyond that, there was no way of communicating. And that started to change about midway through my career, because you'd have people that might have the old, what we used to call bat phone, where you had this little suitcase size phone, and you'd have one or two of those on the ship, and if they felt somebody warranted needing to call home about something, they'd let them use that for a little while.
Was that a sat phone or?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So tell everybody, I know, but tell everybody how the mail arrived, how you would get, because that would explain why some letters would come before other letters.
Sure. The mail would get sent through. Let's walk a letter from my wife writing to when it got into my hands on the ship. So she'd put it in the U.S. postal system, and it just said, USS Tarawa, and it gets sent, and eventually it would arrive at USS Tarawa. That's an address, a mailing address was the name of the ship. And I'd get it. But how it was delivered depended on where we were. So usually you wouldn't get mail until you pulled into port somewhere to refuel and reprovision, and then the mail would all arrive en masse, and you'd get multiple letters. The other way you got mail sometimes was either it would get delivered by helicopter, because one of the large store ships would be the one that went into port to get the fuel and the stores and come out, and you'd do an underway replenishment, so you'd be about 150, 120 feet from that ship with cables running between them, and they push stuff back and forth, and among the stuff that would come over are bags of mail, and that would get sorted by your postal clerk on the ship and handed out. And then your outgoing mail would also get taken off, or they'd do it by helicopter. There was a rumored, this is one of these funny things, you'll know what I'm talking about. It was rumored there were mail buoys. So this is like the traditional prank that people would pull on new people, is they tell them, oh yeah, go stand on the bow of the ship, and here's a set of binoculars, and put this big flotation vest, and here's this 15-foot boat hook, and what you're going to do is stand out there and you're going to look for the buoy that has our mail in it, and when we go by you have to reach over with this pole and grab it and bring it aboard, and that's how we get our mail. And I got pulled into that, and I was going to be the mail buoy watcher. Actually, I was the mail buoy safety observer. So I had two other guys working for me, and I was out there to make sure that they didn't fall in the water. That was my job. Except we actually found the mail buoy.
Oh, okay. Tell us what happened.
Well, what happened, we were in SoCal op areas, and a F-14 went by at very low level right next to us, and then put on his afterburners and went straight up. Now, predictably, when you're at low level and you suddenly go vertical and your afterburners are hitting the water, there's this big spume of water that appears. So, he's dropped the mail buoy. Well, by actual coincidence, there was some piece of debris in the water right about where he did that. And so we're going, come left, we'll get the mail buoy, except, we weren't near it, so we were yelling, we passed it, we got to circle around. And then the postal clerk comes running up with this soaking wet mail bag and says, yeah, we got it from the back end of the ship. It took them months to convince me that it was a joke. I was absolutely and totally convinced we had found the mail buoy. They could have run that same prank on me a dozen times.
And for those that don't know, being a newbie, whether you're officer or enlisted in any military, it's just like this incredible rite of passage for the, it's not even the first year, it's the first time you do this. So they know that you've never experienced anything. So you could just get duped for all sorts of stuff. But eventually we become
engineers
the people
would be given a bucket and a towel and told, okay, go get me a bucket of steam.
I know.
And this poor bastard be running all over the ship, and somebody, they go in the galley and they take one of the steam kettles and they'd empty some steam and put the towel over. Okay, take this back down. And he'd get there and they'd take it's all gone. Go get another bucket of steam. And they'd keep sending him back until he realized. Or the guys in the radar room, get me a can of relative bearing grease. That was one of my favorites. There were a bunch of these jokes that people pull on one another, and eventually everybody kind of copped on to the fact it was happening. On the amphib ships, it was hilarious because one of the things the sailors love to do is they'd go stand in a line in front of a locked door somewhere. Now, Marines aboard ship typically have absolutely nothing to do all day. And eventually they'd see, Navy guy standing in line. I may as well see what's there. I'll get in the line too. And eventually the Navy guys in the front of the line are going, oh, damn, I got to be on watch. And they'd wander off. You could come back hours later and there'd be a dozen Marines standing in front of this locked door waiting for it to open for whatever it was. So,
the great thing about that, when you get this stuff pulled on you, eventually you do enough time, so you get to be the pranks.
Oh yeah,
the prankster. Yeah. So what goes around comes around in the military.
Although I never did. I was annoyed, irritated, humiliated. I don't know what you'd call it. Enough by it being done to me that I didn't want to do it to anybody else. I didn't think that was nice. I understand it's in good humor and it doesn't hurt anybody, but the truth is shipboard duty is bloody exhausting. Because in addition to your regular normal duties, you're also on watch. So you'll have to get up at midnight and go stand watch somewhere from midnight to 4 in the morning. And then you get to go back to bed for an hour and a half before reveille sounds. You get up, have breakfast, and start the day over again. And you don't have a normal sleep cycle because that watch rotates every day. So if you have midnight to 4 this night, the next day you're going to have 4 in the morning to 6 in the morning, and then you'll have 6 in the morning to 8, and 8 to noon, and it keeps rotating. So you don't ever develop any kind of sleep pattern that resembles a normal circadian rhythm. And that tires you out, and then it gets interrupted. Even if you do manage to have one of those nights where you get to sleep in for a full night, inevitably there's some sort of fire drill or something in the middle of the night where you have to get up. So everybody is just wiped. I remember times that I would go up at, say, midnight to relieve the watch on the bridge, and you'd go up there and you'd walk around and suddenly realize literally everybody, all 11 people on the bridge, were asleep. They were standing up. They were, levered in corners or whatever. Everybody was dead out asleep. As you can imagine, that's not good for ship safety when you're steaming in the crowded waters. But that's how exhausting sea duty can be. So, yeah.
Unlike shore duty, where you can have a watch, but there's a bigger pool of people to pull from, so you rotate. Whereas the ship, that you have who you have, and God forbid someone ends up in sick bay or something like that, and then there's the. Did you have like duty swapping? Were you allowed to do that? Like, because I know I could. I was actually the
yes,
swapper
underway,
swappee, but
in port you could do that. Sometimes you needed to get approval if you had a special billet or something. But most people could just say, yeah, Bob and I are going to swap duty days. And nobody really cared. Underway, you kind of had to get permission because people had qualifications for certain jobs. And you couldn't take somebody who was, say, qualified as the radar operator and have him say, well, I'm going to go and sleep in tonight, so Bob's going to take my shift at midnight, and Bob isn't qualified to operate that radar. So it became a big problem. And then ships do not typically have a lot of depth in their manpower pool. So there may be only one or two guys who are qualified on a particular piece of equipment or for a certain task. And you couldn't really swap those people out. So when they needed some reason to be off, you really had to scramble to find a way to fill that watch bill back up and keep it in the right qualifications for all the right slots.
Mm-hmm. So essentially your entire career or being on a ship is just one big challenge. But what I'd like to do is, can you tell us about one memorable, challenging moment in your career that sticks out above everything else?
Let me refer to my notes. I don't remember what I said.
No, I think we were talking about the SEALs landing in Mogadishu.
Oh, okay, yeah. So for those of you who might remember, when we put troops ashore for Operation Restore Hope, which was covering the UN and humanitarian organizations when they were trying to distribute food during that horrendous famine in Somalia. So the amphib group I was with were sent there, and the decision had not yet been made that we were going to go in and do this, but they thought it was a possibility. So our 3 ships were sent to go off the coast of Mogadishu, which is the capital of Somalia, and wait for orders to go in. And we were told there's the possibility you're going to need to land your Marines to go secure the airfield and the port so we can start bringing in follow-on UN forces and supplies. So for us, we felt this was kind of a combat operation, because literally you're off over the horizon so nobody can see you. We turned off all our radars. We're in total emissions control, so no radio signals or anything going out. And when we'd go in at night and we'd put the SEALs in to go do beach reconnaissance to find the best area that we were going to put the Marines in, we could see tracers arcing over the city. You could hear explosions going off. And so it was a hot zone inside Mogadishu. The warlord factions were busy fighting each other. It was a dangerous place. So eventually, and then in the morning before sunlight, we'd steam back. We'd retrieve our SEALs. We'd steam back over the horizon so nobody knew we were there. Eventually, the decision was made to go in. So the night of the landing, and I'm trying to give you this from our perspective on the ship, we all come steaming in, lights off, ready to put the Marines on the beach. And before we send the Marines in, we send the SEALs in again. The SEALs are going to put up marker buoys to show this is where the beach that we're landing on is. This is standard amphibious planning So the SEALs go in, and the captain and I, because we had the SEALs on our ship, the captain and I are sitting on the bridge. We're going, okay, they should be landing about now. And we look up, and suddenly this searchlight turns on right on the beach that we know they're coming in. We see all these little flashes. Now, you know what we were thinking? We're thinking the SEALs just got ambushed. And the captain says, Mount 2-5, take that light under fire. And I say, Captain, we should wait until the SEALs ask for us to do that. And thank God we did, because it turned out that wasn't an ambush. That was the International Press Corps who'd been flown in by Central Command without telling the amphibs that they'd done this. So there we are. I almost blew Dan Weather away.
That would have been quite the international incident.
You think? Just a little?
Just a tiny bit.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's the kind of situation that can happen when you have a lack of communication between different branches. So some public affairs officer back at headquarters in Bahrain makes this decision, which is a logical and intelligent decision. Send the press corps in so they can film the U.S. It's good PR for everybody. We're going in to save Somalia. But he's not an operator, so he's not thinking, maybe I should tell the ships that are going to be landing these guys that, yeah, we've sent the International Press Corps. They're going to be landing this afternoon, and they'll be there when you put troops ashore at dark 30. So, oopsie.
I think too that, when I was in, sometimes I think that people outside the military actually know more than we know, because there's this need to know. But then there's also this thing like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing.
Yeah.
Eye roll. It's just,
and it's so common, and that's why certain operations in the military are considered complex and dangerous, is because they're typically operations that involve multiple groups coordinating their efforts. So within our little 3-ship amphibious group off the coast, everybody knew exactly what we were doing. We planned it out. We'd had conferences. We'd done, exercises on board, table exercises, planning out how we were going to do it. But there's this other command 1,000 miles away that's involved in the exercise, or the operations, not exercise, who don't think that maybe they ought to communicate with us. And I mean, this is an extreme case that fortunately ended up with nothing bad happening. But you see that kind of thing happening a lot. You get these blue-on-blue engagements, as they call them in Afghanistan and Iraq, where somebody calls in fire support and fails to coordinate with the right unit, and U.S. or Allied troops get killed when the shells land in close proximity to where they were, and nobody bothered to check. And that is not as rare an event as people would think.
So I want to, actually, there's a question in here. There's
Sure.
a shout out, but there's a shout out with a question here. Let me get to that screen really quick here. So Cypher gifted 5 Shills memberships. Thank you for the Shills family, brothers and sisters. And generic username has a $5 super chat for you, Commander. Says, have you always been curious about the world, or was there something in particular that sparked it? And what things are you learning about currently?
Curious about the world. That's an interesting phrase. Well,
you seem to be really knowledgeable, and that impresses me, and I think it impresses
I wouldn't go so
everybody
far
else.
as to say I was curious, but growing up all over the world as I did, it was just second nature that, okay, I live in India. Well, maybe I should know what's going on with Pakistan, because Pakistan and India are about to go to war, and I live in New Delhi, and maybe the Pakistanis are going to shoot at us, which they actually did. I was there during one of those Indo-Pakistani wars, and every night the Pakistanis would send 1 or 2 of their 3 bombers that had the range to hit New Delhi, and they'd fly over and drop bombs. And so my family and I, the air raid sirens go off, and we take shelter in our a little protected room with a mattress over our heads, hoping that nothing hit the house. But, when there are only 3 bombers, you're very unlikely to get hit. But it was still a scary event, although as a 5-year-old, it doesn't really translate in your head that it's dangerous. It's kind of like, oh, this is exciting and different. But curiosity is an interesting turn of phrase. I don't know if I'd say I was curious, but I just always felt a need to understand what was going around on and around me in wherever I was living, because there's always different tensions. Here in the U.S., we don't think in those terms because we're isolated on our 2 sides by giant oceans, and to the north and south we have countries that are fairly friendly with us and we don't have to worry about. But you go to some of the places I was in, India, Indo-Pakistani, Greece, well, the Greeks and the Turks are not good friends, and they fight over a lot of things. Egypt, yeah, I was evacuated from Egypt just before the 1967 Six-Day War. My father was still in the country when it broke out. He was also still in the consulate in Alexandria when an angry mob who Nasser had said, the reason our Air Force was destroyed on the ground was because the Americans bombed it. So the angry mob stormed the U.S. consulate and tried to burn the place down with the people still inside. And so my dad's locked in the vault with the other members of the legation staff who were there, burning classified documents because they're convinced they're about to get killed.
Mm-hmm.
So,
a little comment on his question too. And for me, I don't know if I am sort of curious, but it's more like why. And I was not a good fit for the military because everything I did, well, why? Well, that's like the number one question you don't ask, just do. Don't ask why, just do. Are you a why person, or like, why am I doing this? Or what's the meaning behind this mission? Or why are we involved in this? Is that you?
Why becomes a question that you were not just allowed to ask, but actually encouraged to ask the higher up you progress, because you need to understand what's going on and why it's occurring the way it is so that you can perform your part of that operation or exercise efficiently and effectively. So as an ensign, yeah, I never asked why. The boss would say, do X, yes, sir, and you do it. But when you start getting to be, let's say, a department head, you kind of have to ask, well, why are we doing it this way? Wouldn't this be more efficient? Oh, no, we can't do it that way because. Okay, great. And as you progress up, why becomes a much more important question. And that's not just for officers, although it's more for officers. But senior enlisted people also start asking why type questions. The chief petty officer or an LPO will want to know, well, why are we doing it then instead of here, and why are we doing it? That kind of stuff. That's
good, because that's one of the reasons why I didn't stay in, is because in where I was, medical, dental, medical, it's so hard to make rank. It's just really, really tough. And I was just frustrated because it was just do. Luckily, though, I was taught a lot of things, but I wasn't encouraged to ask why.
Yeah, but I think that's a natural part of the medical profession. Even people who aren't in the military and medical profession have an issue with that, where nurses will be told by the doctor, do this, and they know, based on years of experience, there's a better way to do it. And so they'll try to ask why, and they're told, shut up, you're just a nurse, I'm the doctor, you do what I damn well tell you. And so the nurse either has to kind of fudge it and do it the way she knows it should be done, or follow the instructions, and maybe the patient gets the wrong treatment or whatever. That is a career field where, for lack of a better word, rank figures very prominently, because it's part of ego, especially for the people who are the doctors, because they've gone through this huge, long, grueling process of getting educated. So they become convinced over the course of that training that you're better than everybody else. So why is not part of their lexicon?
Understandable. Just so that our viewers know, we are getting some. I have some really good questions that came in. We are gonna get to them because they're coming in a few different areas. I would love for you. One of the things though that I'm just gonna say I love Commander. It's like a friendship love because it's one of those things where when you have someone who knows you share a common thing with the military, but also the stories that you can swap are very unique. You can't a lot of times you can't tell a civilian your stories because they'll just go so
Yeah.
but I'd love for you to tell a story. Was there a story about lemon chiffon ice cream?
Oh God. Okay, on USS First Ship, the Navy on a ship typically has different eating arrangements. So the enlisted personnel all eat in the galley, which is the enlisted mess. The officers eat in their own wardroom, and in some cases you have a private mess for the captain or the admiral or the staff or what have you, so a very small group. Our captain on that ship liked to mess privately in his own room, but he also liked to come down and hang out with the guys in the wardroom, the other officers at times. But he typically have his regular meal there, and then he'd come to the wardroom to have dessert with us. And he loved ice cream. So he told our supply officer, I want you to have a 5-gallon tub of ice cream in the freezer, the wardroom freezer, so whenever I show up, I can just get a dish of ice cream. Okay, great. Except our supply officer was a real penny pincher. Because unlike the enlisted people who they get their food, the officers have to pay a mess bill every month. So if you have steak and lobster every night, your mess bill is going to be through the roof. So you try to economize to keep the mess bill low. And the supply officer figured out, if I put chocolate ice cream in the freezer, everybody's going to be coming in at all hours to get a bowl of chocolate ice cream because they just want something to snack on. So he found the one flavor of ice cream that nobody liked, which was called lemon chiffon ice cream. And to give you a sense of what it tasted like, it was like taking lemon Pledge furniture polish and spraying it in your mouth. It was god-awful stuff. But that's what we had put in there. And the captain never knew about this because he didn't always come down. And if he did, he'd, oh, you have apple pie, I'll have apple pie, or what have you. So one night he comes in, he says, I'll have a bowl of ice cream. And the mess steward goes in and scoops up the lemon chiffon ice cream. And the captain tastes and goes, what the hell is this? It's lemon chiffon ice cream, sir. Bring it here, because he figured out what was going on. And he takes the 5-gallon tub of ice cream. He opens the hatch, which is right on the walkway next to the side of the ship, and he pitches an almost full 5-gallon container of lemon chiffon ice cream into the ocean. And then he calls the supply officer over and he says, if there isn't chocolate, vanilla, or strawberry in that freezer tomorrow, you're going over the side to recover that chiffon ice cream. Do you understand? Yes, sir. And after that, we always had nice ice cream in the freezer.
You provided a little bit of motivation there.
Yeah, just a little.
Just a tiny bit. All right. I think, are you ready for some viewer questions? Because we
Absolutely.
are going to be, okay, we're going to go, the majority of them, as you know, are, to do with the Ukraine war. And so let's dive right in. Let me double check if we have any other donations here. I do want to remind everybody that usually we do a fundraiser, and you see that Janine's link is in the chat. For those of you who joined us after the beginning where I explained it, Janine is volunteering in Ukraine right now. She went home for a couple months and she's back again. She not only works 12, 13-hour days preparing food for the Magic Food Army, which is a charity, actual authorized charity. She does fundraisers on her own. She has been dropping or I think Dick has been dropping a link too for her community page. You can see some of the fundraiser things she has on there. She just finished a fundraiser for a battalion to provide walkie-talkies, and they're so thankful. And then they because she's so effective at fundraising, they asked her, can you get us a solar panel for our Starlink? So that's her next fundraiser. Also, as her friend, she works so hard, she doesn't have time to go and get a job to provide money for herself. She does give of her own money too for these fundraisers. Consider putting some money in to support her too. Janine needs things just for everyday life: shampoo, toiletries, everything that you need in your daily life. Janine needs too. So please consider donating to her, or looking at her links and giving her some money. She reads all of the messages. She reads when they're tagged for certain things. So I encourage you to do that for Janine. We have to support the people that are over there supporting the military. And thank you for everybody who's already donated. Okay. I'm going to go to let's see, Missy on our Shills Discord. She was like one of the first persons to put a question, and so thank you. Commander McMillan, could you please give your estimate of the scale of a Ukrainian landing in Crimea compared to D-Day?
Oh, Lord. Okay, so D-Day, at first we need to clarify, D-Day is a military term that just means the day of a landing. It doesn't mean the Normandy invasion. That's Operation Overlord. And so you have D-Day at Iwo Jima, you have D-Day at Salerno, everywhere we do a landing, D-Day is the day of the landing. It's just a term that's used. So I'm assuming she means D-Day Omaha, because that's kind of become the synonymous use of the word for most civilians. And I'm not trying to put her down or anything, I'm just explaining. So the Normandy landings involved something like 800 ships to put about 160,000 troops on the beach the first day. It was a massive operation, not necessarily the largest of the war. I think it's actually the second largest, but it was huge. Anything the Ukrainians are going to do in terms of an amphibious operation is going to be very small, because they don't really have a large fleet of ships to carry a large number of people to conduct an amphibious landing. I think pre-war they had one relatively small landing ship tank, so you could put, if that wasn't sunk in the opening days of the war, which I think it was, but I'm not positive. If it wasn't sunk, so you get maybe a half dozen vehicles and 150, 200 guys coming off of that. Assume you throw in a couple other small boats that they scrounge up. You can use civilian boats to conduct a military operation. That's assuming the Chinese ever try to invade Taiwan. That's about half of the invasion flotilla is going to be commandeered civilian craft. All told, the Ukrainians might be able to put 1,000, 1,500 guys on the beach on that first day. There's your relative sizes. And you're not going to take the Crimean Peninsula with just 1,000, 2,000 people. So any landing the Ukrainians conduct in Crimea is going to be a supporting element of a larger ground drive coming down from the top of the peninsula, from the land connection.
Kind of like a special ops thing?
Yeah,
or...
it'd be a special operation to seize a key location, like a key bridge, or take out an airfield or a radar site or something like that. So it's a much smaller scale operation. They simply lack the equipment to conduct anything even remotely approaching the size of the Overlord landings in Normandy. I hope that answers the question.
Hopefully in the future, the Western world will help them build back up so they do have some sea presence there, for the future.
But to put this in perspective, even today, the U.S. military, working in conjunction with our allies, Britain and France, who are the only ones that really have a significant amphibious capability of their own, we could no way put anything resembling that size of a landing force on a beach today. I mean, the Normandy landing is 5 divisions landing by sea. All our allies together with us, we might be able to land a single division. That gives you the relative size of amphibious forces. And that's because most military analysis has indicated that when you conduct an amphibious landing, you don't do like we did in World War II, which is send these guys right into the teeth of a fortified beach. You don't land on Iwo Jima, you don't land on Omaha Beach. You go where the enemy has, maybe 2 guys with a radio on the beach reporting that you're coming. They don't have any big guns to stop you because it's far too costly to land across an opposed beach. You do it where the enemy ain't, not where the enemy is.
Thank you for that answer. I think it's interesting for me to hear the comparisons and contrasts, not only for existing militaries, whether it be the Russo-Ukrainian war, but also what the United States or what the Western countries, United States, is capable of doing versus what we did in previous wars.
Sure,
everything's changed so much. Sally Luce gave a very an interesting question here. Let's see. Okay. Are you concerned about the widespread disparity between Russian military bases and ships present in the Arctic when compared with the presence of NATO bases and ships in the Arctic?
The question there is really where in the Arctic. On the Pacific side, I don't even think we have a base up in Alaska anymore. We used to have a naval station at Adak in the Aleutian Island chain. I think that was disestablished years ago, decade ago, at least. So the closest real U.S. naval base would be Everett here in Washington State. So that's a hell of a long way to go. So yeah, we don't have a lot of presence in the Pacific side up in the Arctic. In the Atlantic, the Norwegians have their ports, the British have their ports. So there's plenty of support operations up there. If you're talking about operations in the actual Arctic because of the ice, you're talking about submarines. And since a submarine can pretty much stay out at sea, I won't say indefinitely, but close to it, you send the sub out and it just patrols under the ice cap and you're fine. So in terms of confronting the Russians in the NATO theater, I think we're more than adequately covered. In the Pacific, I remain a little nervous, but at the same time, the Russian Pacific Fleet these days is an empty shadow of its former self. A lot of the ships there are rusting away at the piers. They haven't been to sea in years, if not decades. Photo analysis will tell you that some of them have actually sunk at the piers. Most of the budget that the Russian Navy gets is put into the other 3 fleets on the European side, so the Black Sea, the Baltic, and the Northern Fleet. Comparatively little ever makes its way to the Pacific Fleet, so it's a trade-off over there. But then you also end up with a question of how much need is there for a fleet to be in that theater? And I would argue there really isn't a lot of need. The Japanese islands are the only area there that's under direct threat, and the Japanese Navy is quite capable of defending the home islands. The Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force is I've worked with them on a number of occasions. They're a very impressive organization.
So there's a couple other tie-in questions to this.
Sure.
And because Sally did take the time, she has a follow-up question. If it were up to you, if you were the the fleet commander, what changes would you make to modernize the U.S. Navy?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. For ground warfare, I think the big thing that we need to start focusing on with a great deal of intensity is drone warfare. And I think the one thing that the war in Ukraine has shown is that drone warfare has become a major, major part of modern military operations. There hasn't been a lot of drone activity at sea beyond the Ukrainians using some of their little drone suicide boats to take out ships, but that's pretty much just coastal type operations. Using a drone at sea for blue water attacks is much more complicated because you're trying to deal with locating, and sea state is much worse than in coastal areas and such. But I would think if I were in charge of the Navy, that's one area I would want to focus on, is to start upping drone integration with the other features that we have. Heretofore, we've relied heavily on manned aircraft to do those kind of operations for long-range recon, for strike operations and such. And I think we could probably replace a good deal of that with drone strikes and drone recon. And I think that's one area I would focus on. I've heard people say, well, why do we need a surface Navy? Because it's obviously so vulnerable to anti-ship missiles, it's vulnerable to submarines, etc. Well, you can't use submarines, which are far more effective as a naval weapon in times of war. You can't use submarines to do what's called established presence. You can't use a submarine to protect merchant ships, because it doesn't have the ability to shoot down enemy missiles and aircraft that might attack any merchant shipping. So you do need some of that, but I think that there might be some way to change the compositions of our force. We tend to go very big, so we have destroyers today, which are the size of World War II heavy cruisers. Our cruisers today are the size of World War II battle cruisers, that kind of stuff. I think we might look at trying to fill in more on the low end of that spectrum, where we'd have smaller ships that would be specifically focused on protecting merchant convoys, bringing ground forces into a theater. And that's one of the key things a lot of people don't realize, is you can't win a war per se with a naval force. A naval force is an enabler that allows you to bring your ground force to bear against an enemy, to reinforce Europe with forces from CONUS, to invade an enemy-occupied island or what have you. That's the kind of thing, and I think we could look at that a little bit more.
Thank you.
Anyway, those are the two areas I focus.
Missy also thanked you for answering her question. Thank you so
Sure.
much. Okay, we did have a super chat in here from generic username for $5. Thank you. I know the Bradley is a transport vehicle, but it looks so modular. Can they do other tasks that might surprise us?
I'm laughing because when they said the Bradley is a transport vehicle, that's the name of the first ship I was on, the USS Bradley, and I'm going, we didn't transport anything. It was a small frigate. But no, I think they mean the M2 Bradley infantry fighting vehicle.
Yes.
So would you repeat the question for me?
Sure. The question was, I know the Bradley is a transport vehicle, but it looks so modular. Can they do other tasks that might surprise us?
So the Bradley is a kind of a hybrid of an armored personnel carrier and a tank or a light tank. It's what is called in modern military parlance an infantry fighting vehicle. So to a layman's eye, it looks a little bit like a tank, but it really isn't. It has a fairly small gun. In the case of the Bradley, it carries a 25 millimeter chain gun. But the main portion of that vehicle is an empty box in the back where they carry infantry. It has a door that they lower the back hatch and all the guys run out and go do infantry things. The idea for that infantry fighting vehicle is to bring infantry into a combat zone in a protected carrying unit, which then has the weaponry on it to support that infantry. A regular armored personnel carrier would be that same Bradley, absent that gun turret on top. So it wouldn't be able to really support the infantry. So that's the difference between those. So the Bradley, what we're finding with its operations by the being used by the Ukrainians, is quite a capable little vehicle. It can use that 25 millimeter chain gun from the right aspect to shoot the crap out of a tank. That 25 millimeter chain gun will penetrate the armor on the rear or sides of most of those Russian tanks. The Bradley also carries a couple of TOW missiles, which are a wire-guided long-range anti-tank missile. So what it can't shoot from the side or back, it can shoot from the front with a TOW and take it out. So it's an extremely capable vehicle. Modular, though, you can use it if you wanted to, and the Ukrainians have done this to evacuate wounded personnel from the front line. But that's kind of a misapplication of that vehicle because you don't need that 25 millimeter chain gun, those TOW missiles, if all you're doing is taking infantry out. That you could use an armored personnel carrier, an APC for, like the old US M113, for example. So it's a very good vehicle. The Ukrainians really, really like it. It's far superior to the Russian BMP, which is its equivalent. So I don't know what to say beyond that. Now, you could, if you wanted to, I suppose, take the turret off and put other stuff in there. But it's not really built for that. It's meant to be an infantry fighting vehicle. If you want to have, like something that carries a mortar or carries anti-aircraft guns or something, and they have those, they've modified the old M113s to do that, and they do it quite well. So I know the military is talking about building a replacement for the M113. We still have some of those in service, and I'm sure they'll modify those to do those modular type jobs. But an infantry fighting vehicle kind of needs to be role specific because it has a very narrow defined set of mission parameters, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Thank you. So let's hop over again to the Russian Navy. This question, sure. I was in VC with some people the other night, and we were talking about, weapons, and sure. But then many YouTubers have been talking about, the Russian ships going to the Latin American countries and things like that, and the big show of power, Cuba and all that. But we started talking about the quality, or what, as far as what's left in the Russian fleet. So I'm going to read this slow because it's a little bit of a math percentage thing, but I want to read it how they wanted it to be asked. So the percentage of the naval Russian fleet that is left remaining, and the quality of the weapons that are on those ships are assumed to be poor and low quality or non-functional. What threat does this actually pose?
That's a dangerous assumption to make. Okay.
Well, this was our debate. It was a great debate, but I wanted to make sure this question, because I think it's a great debate, and put it out here too. So what threat does this actually pose to other countries and the subs sitting off the coast of the U.S.? Let's see, I'm kind of mixing it. That are sitting off the coast of the U.S. and the vessels that may be in Latin America, Nicaragua. So we're looking at a percent here. The percentage of the naval fleet that's actually operational, the percentage of weapons that might actually work. What would be the sum total of the actual firepower damage potential that their Navy could do? They're kind of looking for a percent, but what would be your answer here?
Percentage is really hard to quantify because you have to, get all sorts of specific stuff. So let's put it this way. And it's probably going to be a longer, more complicated answer than the questioner wanted, but I'll give it to you.
Let me interject one thing.
Sure.
And this was when you said specifics, and my point was, we have nuclear and non-nuclear vessels carrying nuclear, non-nuclear weapons, and that was,
right.
And I think that there's a difference, because a nuclear vessel with nuclear weapons obviously can do more damage, but maybe that'll make it a little easier for you to.
Sure. So the Russian Navy, specifically the vessels, subsurface ships, etc., is built very differently from Western ships. To put it in blunt terms, they're a fire and forget system. The Russians legitimately do not expect, if they get into a peer-on-peer, i.e. against the U.S. and NATO, get into a fight with that peer-on-peer opponent, that most of their Navy is never coming home. They're all going to get sunk. And the ships are designed that way. They're not designed to be survivable. They're not designed to be able to take a lot of damage. The idea is that the ship or sub goes out, fires off its ordnance, and then tries to escape before it gets sunk. That's the mindset. So, and to give you an idea how that translates, I got to go on board a then Soviet ship, now Russian ship, and I don't know if this specific ship, but certainly ones from its class are still in service in the Russian Navy, when we did a joint exercise with the Russians off of Hawaii. This is when we were still friends right before the wall came down, glasnost and all that. And friends of mine, Navy friends, and I went on board this Russian ship to take a tour. And the one thing that just stood out to us as compared to a U.S. Navy ship is, on a U.S. Navy ship, you walk around and there is a firefighting and damage control station probably every 20 to 30 feet, both inside and outside the ship, on every deck. We expect, if we're going to get hit, we need to be able to pump the water out of the ship and put the fire out so the ship won't sink and we can stay in the fight. That Russian ship, now we didn't get to go inside, but we could see through open doors. But we got to walk around the outside. The entire topside space of this guided missile destroyer had one water cannon over the flight deck where their helicopter is, and up near the bridge had one regular hose firefighting station on the entire topside portion of this ship. That's it. So our assessment, and pretty much Navy ship systems commands analysis, is that all it takes is a single relatively minor hit on a Russian ship and it will sink. It will burn to the waterline and go down. And that's why one of the reasons you're seeing these relatively minor hits by Ukrainian suicide boat drones or missiles or what have you, sinking fairly large ships, is because they don't have a capability to repair their own damage at sea. So the idea of sending these 3 ships and 1 submarine into the Caribbean really doesn't cause a lot of concern. I mean, during the period when it was the Soviet Union, the Russians used to do this on an annual basis. They would have an annual training cruise that would go to the Caribbean, go to Cuba, maybe to Nicaragua, show the flag, do stuff. And if the press felt like it, they'd report it and, you know, hats on fire, the world's coming to an end, my God, the Russians are here. But it was a normal training evolution. Nobody thought anything about it. Right now, they do the same thing, and now admittedly they haven't done it for many years, but they're doing it with this same small group. And to put it in perspective, of these 3 ships and 1 submarine, only 2 are what you would really call combatant ships. There's 1 guided missile destroyer. Actually, I think it's a frigate. I don't even think it's a destroyer. And then there's 1 guided missile submarine. Each of those ships may carry 12 at most missiles that are land attack variant missiles. And of those 12, maybe 2 are nuclear tipped. So even if you inflate those numbers a bit, you're only talking about 6 potential nuclear weapons that are on those ships. The other 2 ships, one's a fleet tug replenishment ship, and the other one is an amphibious ship that has a small contingent of their little Marines. And let's be honest, landing a half dozen, armored personnel carriers with Russian Marines on it anywhere along the continental United States coast, it's basically a suicide pact for those poor bastards. So it's meaningless.
Okay, so what about the big bad Belgorod?
Okay, the Belgorod. Which one is that? I'm trying to remember.
That's the one that it's their biggest nuke. It has the Poseidon, I think it's the Poseidon missiles on it.
Oh, okay.
And it's got supposedly it has drone like small drones on it, which actually are nuclear. You have nuclear weapons in them, and now again, that's why I say supposedly, because there's all sorts of stuff out there. But those can be, theoretically, what the Russians said is we could put this in the middle of some ocean, and we can take out 10 different countries and all of this. So it's very inflated. It's a lot of propaganda.
It's bullshit. Let's not mince words. It's bullshit.
Thank you.
Okay, so. If it's the kind of ship I think it is, if I recall correctly, it's got like 20 or 24 missile cells on the front of the ship. And
no, I'm talking about a submarine.
Okay, I know which one we talk. Okay,
yeah.
So yeah, it's like the old what do they call it? Typhoon class. Mm-hmm. It's an advanced Typhoon class is what it is. Those are strategic missiles. We've got our own strategic missile subs. It doesn't matter where you park them. The missiles on those things are intercontinental ballistic missiles. You put it anywhere, and it's pretty much able to cover the entire opposition's place. honestly, it doesn't even need to lead port to be able to hit those targets for those missiles. And this is just more posturing. And if they want to posture, I suppose we could do it and say, yeah, we've got our own Ohio-class boomer subs that are out there, and we could, turn Russia into a nuclear wasteland overnight. What's the point? Everybody knows if you fire one nuclear weapon, strategic level nuclear weapon, and kiss the planet goodbye, because the other side can't hold back. Everybody has to release everything out of their nuclear arsenal. And game over, folks.
Mm-hmm. I agree. So the in the VC the other night, this question came up. Sorry, I'm like trying to get my. I'm
100-foot nuclear powered robot with laser eyes. Yes, exactly.
I'm trying to make sense of this so that we're not jumping all over the place and it just ends up getting weird. But I want to stick with their question too, because they're from the. I'm not going to dox you, but they're from the UK. So. They brought this up. The UK has it's called a yardstick threat assessment report they give every day. And if I'm getting those words wrong, forgive me. But and I did look it up. It's really what the threats get for them, threats against the UK, what to worry about, what not to do. And they said, well, does the US have that? And we don't have. Do we have a report that comes out every day, like from the Pentagon with that, or?
I'm sure there is, but we tend to overclassify everything. So, yeah, it's something that is on a need-to-know basis. So you and I would never see it. Even when I was in and I had TSSCI clearances for all sorts of special projects. Even I probably never saw one. If I did, it was unmemorable. But yeah, it's something that I'm sure gets done, but it's not something everybody knows about or cares about.
Yeah. Theirs is public. I saw it. So, kudos to them, I guess. I don't know. It could
Great Britain has a lot more, in my opinion, intelligent view on what really needs to be classified and what doesn't.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, let's see. There was a question. Okay, this is an air defense system.
Okay.
Question from Cadlin T. Putler has apparently started moving S-300 and S-400 air defense systems away from Crimea and supposedly aims to replace them with the new S-500 system. Does this move make sense from a strategic standpoint, and could it be a sign that Putler realized that holding Crimea is untenable?
So let's put this in perspective. The S-300 and S-400 are kind of like our Patriot missile. It's a really good air defense missile. It can shoot down stuff. The Russians have been using the S-300 and S-400 for much of this war in a surface-to-surface mode. So they're shooting missiles out of those anti-aircraft launchers to bomb Ukrainian cities, basically. Doesn't make much sense because you've got this huge elaborate radar network and everything else that goes with an air defense system, and they're basically using it like a Scud launcher. So it's a waste of finances, resources, whatever you want to call it. And now, remember, we're talking about a country which is under sanctions and therefore has very limited access to the high-tech items it needs to produce something like these, or the new vaunted S-500 system. They're putting that there. For what purpose? Obviously, they think the Ukrainians are going to do something. So why do you need the top end, probably only built one or two of them because they can't afford to do more than that? Why do you need one of those in Crimea? It's because the Ukrainians have been launching missile and drone strikes against those S-3 and S-400 sites in Crimea and taking them out. and they are effectively irreplaceable systems. So maybe they're coming to the realization that taking this very expensive, super high-tech air defense missile and using it to lob rockets at cities is a misapplication of resources. So they're pulling them out, they're putting them behind the front lines to start protecting their troops from getting struck from what's about to show up in the theater in a couple of months. Those F-16s everybody's been raving about. Now, the F-16s are not a panacea. They're not going to be the, cure-all for the Ukrainians. They're going to change the situation somewhat to their advantage. But I think what this is a case of is the Russians overreacting because A, they've been taking losses of these systems that they can't afford to, and B, they realize that once F-16s show up, the rest of the front lines suddenly become vulnerable to airstrikes, and they want to do something to protect their troops from those airstrikes. I think that's what's kind of going on.
Okay. A follow-up question. Sarah in our chat had a good question. She said, can the commander say something about news that Ukraine can use U.S. weapons to target any place where large numbers of soldiers are preparing for an attack? Is this true? I haven't seen any news. I'm sorry, I haven't followed up myself, but so it sounds like because what the United States said, it was mostly for Kharkiv, where they could defend Kharkiv by hitting, if they were lobbing weapons, they could hit those. But it sounds like she might be saying it could be not anywhere.
Right. This is an indirect question about that U.S. restriction on not using our, ATACMS or whatever, to hit targets deep inside Russia, except for the one area we've relaxed, which is right around Kharkiv. Yeah, we could, or not we, but the Ukrainians could use those systems to attack all sorts of other sites, but we've decided not to let them. But at the same time, many of the NATO countries which have been transferring stuff to the Ukrainians have not put similar restrictions on their weaponry. So you're seeing things like the Storm Shadow missile being used to strike targets deep inside Russian territory because they're not covered by that U.S. restriction. So they could use what they have to do that, and they are doing so. Why is the U.S. maintaining this restriction on don't use our weapons deep inside Russia? I'm on record already of saying I think it's because there's a deep concern about escalating the situation. Putin is effectively a cornered rat at this point. And when the rat gets cornered and scared, it starts doing really dangerous and dumb stuff. And all it's going to take is Pooters to go, oh, well, they're shooting targets in Kursk, so I'm going to release a nuclear weapon so we can hit Kiev or what have you. And suddenly it changes the entire dynamic, and I think NATO hasn't come out and said it, but I'm sure that there have been closed room discussions about if the Russians use WMD, we're all in.
That, and I was going to ask that, what's the, where's the line for Article 5, Article 6? Because in many people's minds, it's already been crossed, but it's like, oh, it's okay. And everybody wants to know, when will NATO just say enough is enough and just say we're all in?
Technically, to invoke Article 5, you have to have been attacked. And thus far, there have been no actual attacks on NATO countries. There have been a few missiles that have gone astray and landed in NATO countries, but it's not a direct attack, or at least the countries that got hit have decided not to call it a direct attack. So nobody has gone to invoke Article 5. And why? It's because of that escalation question. Nobody wants to trigger World War III. And the U.S., I think, is afraid that that release of the the weapons we've given Ukraine to strike targets deep inside Russia would cross that threshold and give Putin the excuse he needs to start using nukes or chemical weapons or whatever. And I think that's the reason it's being done. Do I agree with it? Personally, no. But I'm not the big cheese in the White House. I don't make those decisions. And doubtless, he has access to information that you and I not only don't have access to, but probably can't even imagine the reports that he's getting and telling him what he needs to know. Mm-hmm. So I would be careful. Now, I've seen this in the Discord, and I just saw it posted here by Sweet. Has World War III already started? I think if you want to use an analogy from World War II, the origins leading up to it, I think we're in the invasion of Ethiopia slant Spanish Civil War stage of World War II. The main event hasn't started, but everybody can see the way things are lining up and the initial pre-fighting between proxies is going on. So if you wanted to extend that, you might say, well, the Hamas and Hezbollah attacks on Israel are part of that. The Houthi attacks in the Red Sea are part of that. Because we know Russia is at least partially behind all those activities. All the threats going on from China against Taiwan, I'm sure Russia is urging China to make those threats. Whether the Chinese actually or have any intention of going through with those, my opinion is no, but again, I don't have access to all the intel. I know they have all their forces and all of them, are on higher alert and they're doing stuff, but I really don't think they plan to attack because there's almost no gain for them to attack Taiwan.
Mm-hmm. I've read a few things where, Putler has actually come across and say, well, if you don't realize it yet, we're in World War III. And Well,
it's like, I'm going to throw nukes if you blow your nose on Thursday. And that's all he does is just hyperbole and bullshit.
But what I see too, and this is a great point of debate, is when you look at World War III, from a traditional point, it's lobbing weapons. We are in a technology war also. So honestly, in my mind, we are getting attacked. Our United States infrastructure, our hospital systems, our cuts between China and Russia. And I have to be in the mindset we are in World War III, because if we don't stay on defense from this, they will take us down from the inside out with our infrastructure.
I couldn't agree with you more. But selling that to a Western public that hacking attacks are the same as logging a strategic nuke, that's a different kettle of fish.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And I think the Russians have realized that they can use information warfare, they can use computer hacks, all that kind of stuff as a non-crossing that threshold attack to weaken us. Mm-hmm. So in a lot of ways you could say that they are preparing the battlefield for an actual conflict. But we are, because of the way democracy works, we're incapable of really effectively responding to that.
That's an interesting end note for that. Definitely something to think about.
Yeah.
So here's another really interesting twist, a question. So recently, North Korea and Russia signed that mutual defense pact, and North Korea said they're going to send weapons now. So theoretically, if things did escalate more, will hit you. Do you think there could be factions inside of Russia that
definitely,
that might consider hitting North Korea? because we've seen factions inside there, hit things inside of Russia, and and actually, what I think there was a terrorist attack today too in a Orthodox church. But so it's an interesting thing. You hit us, we'll hit you, and I think this stems from remember when Putin came out and said, "Oh well, if the U.S. and the U.K. and all these places are giving weapons, then you can be a target too." And I think that kind of goes towards that. So,
I don't think anybody, even us, is truly capable of conducting clandestine sabotage, whatever you want to call it, attacks inside North Korea. North Korea is an extremely closed society, and getting in there without being noticed is close to impossible. I mean, even the South Koreans who, look the same, speak the same language, understand the culture, even for them, trying to sneak their agents into North Korea is an extremely dangerous and complex task. So, yeah, I don't see some Russian faction attacking the North Koreans. Destroying rail lines connecting the two countries, that they're shipping some of that ordnance, possibly, but not inside North Korea itself.
A little bit of sabotage here and there.
Again, the sabotage would have to be on the Russian side of the border.
For sure. Let me see here. We've got about 10 minutes left. We covered. Let me see if there's anything that was put in the question room. Let me double check chat. There was, okay, so this is interesting. A couple days ago, there was a proposal from in Congress. Let me get to that Russia be formally designated a terrorist state. How likely do you think it is that that's going to go through?
That's a tough one. And it crosses the line into personal predilections and opinions on my side. So I have to be careful how I word this. I think there are a significant number of people on the right side of the aisle in Congress who are either unwitting or actually paid agents of the Russians at this point. And so trying to get any such measure passed through Congress is going to be extremely difficult because of the opposition from the right. So possibly, I don't know. We do know that we're starting to see cracks developing inside the GOP of, the orange shit-given cultists versus the old rhino crowd. If enough rhinos decide to agree with the people proposing such legislation, then yeah, it could get passed, but I'm dubious.
It'll be interesting to see where that goes. And if people saw me chuckle, it's with that word shit given. I love when you say that word. It just always brings a smile to my face.
Fling the poo!
Oh, God. Earlier, I don't know, people saw me doing with the tissue. It's like I literally was laughing so hard I was almost brought to tears. And that's the joy that Commander brings. And
no show with me is complete without Mr. Fuzz.
Puppies! Aw, you have the best doggies.
Yeah, he's not feeling well today, so I got to be nice to him.
All right. We're almost done. We're almost out of time here, and so there's I had asked Commander McMillan if there was something that we don't. It doesn't come up on the Saturday stream, or he hasn't been asked before, so he actually gave me a couple things to pick from. So I'm going to give him, I'm going to ask him the never ending AUMF. You said that never gets
Okay.
brought up.
This, I think, is probably one of the biggest concerns I have about the U.S. military today. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, post 9/11, President Bush went to Congress and asked for an authorization for use of military force. Because according to current law, the president can only use force for 90 days, military forces for combat operations for 90 days before he has to get a full congressional approval. In other words, effectively a declaration of war. So they went and asked for this authorization for the use of military force. It did not have an end date. It did not have any specific conditions put on it. All it said was the president is authorized to use U.S. military forces anywhere in whatever quantity and type he feels is necessary to prosecute the global war on terror. Here we are, almost 30 years since 9/11, and we're still fighting the global war on terror, and the presidents since then have been able to send troops to do anything they want anywhere without getting congressional approval. It's basically, I can declare war without Congress actually voting on it. And to my mind, that is incredibly dangerous, because it's all we need is somebody like the orange shit given deciding, well, I'm losing poll numbers here. Maybe I can get them up by going to war with, let's invade Mexico. We'll solve all the immigration problems. And to say, oh, well, I found out that there are terrorists among the people that are trying to cross the border. Ta-da! I have authorization to use military force. That's the kind of BS this potentially allows. And I find that enormously alarming. And I would like to see Congress either modify the AUMF or repeal it entirely, or modify it, as I said, by putting in place certain restrictions saying you can only do this for 90 days or 120 days or whatever. You can only use up to 4,000 troops to accomplish this goal or what have you, without coming to Congress and getting further approval. I think that's critical for preservation of our democracy.
And that's I want to, just so our listeners know, I actually wasn't even aware of this. I had thrown some articles at Commander McMillan throughout time here, and he reminded me that this is what's happening.
I want to correct somebody here. They said Reagan used it in Grenada and Nicaragua. No, he didn't. That is a separate case. He didn't need to get approval because it was within that 90-day window, and he used forces under a certain threshold. The AMUF is entirely post 9/11. And it's worded so vaguely that it basically is carte blanche to do whatever the president wants.
I think it's important that people know that that's sitting out there with the elections coming up in November and what could possibly be happening. And it is extremely, extremely frightening.
Absolutely.
So, all right, let me take a look here. Got a couple of minutes. So I want to go back for those of you who joined us later on in the stream. For my streams, we usually do a fundraiser for the people that are they are guests. Since I don't know, Commander, we're going to fundraise you a microphone. I think we already have. But no, what we're asking is for people to visit Janine Terblanc's page in her they've been dropping the links. Janine is in Ukraine. She volunteers for the Magic Food Army. She works 12, 13-hour days. she also fundraises for a battalion. She just finished a fundraiser for walkie-talkies, and they were so grateful. And she's such an awesome fundraiser that they said, can we get a solar panel to use with our Starlink? So she started that. And being a big fan of Janine, and she's one of our heroes. She's part of the Shills. Also ask you if you could think about giving her a little personal money, because she has every day uses the same things we do. You know, she can't eat, but she likes getting other food and personal things. So consider supporting her that way, because she put so many volunteer hours in. There's no way she can get out and, you know, earn money on her own. So consider that. I also would like to, yesterday on the stream, one of our viewers who listened to Pete said, you know, we should have a prayer group for Pete. Well, Pete, anybody who's listened to Pete from Project Constantine, he's actually said, I'd love to have a prayer army. So what I proposed with the viewer was that we actually have a Discord, and we organize something there. Everybody knows that Pastor Greg Terry has his service on Sunday mornings, which quite a few of you actually do visit, whether you're lurking or in the chat, and we love him too. But if you'd like to be a part of this, let me see here. I had the link. I'll find the link for you. And what we kind of decided on this was, there are several Discords that do have prayer rooms and things like that, but maybe just to kind of take it away from a channel, we're doing a separate Discord. So if you're interested in doing that, and your messages and everything can go to Pete and support Pete on the spiritual level too. So anybody who wants to be involved in that, you can DM me. I will put the link to the Discord in there. I want to thank the support team today. Mr. Dawson, my mentor. I have a few mentors in the chat. You know who you are. I want to thank Shayna Caldwell for being on the Shills account. I want to thank Leslie Bowe for being in with the team today in the chat. Crazy Cat, he's always helps behind the scenes and in the chat. BME, we miss you. He's on vacation, well-deserved vacation with some of the stuff he's gone through. And I just want to thank Dick and Dunk both for this opportunity. And thank you, Commander McMillan. And that, before I give you the last word, I have one last question for Commander McMillan, because he always has so many questions from our audience, and he always has such amazing information. I admire him, and I love talking to him. And I thought, well, Commander, why not have you on once a month? And he actually said, we can try that. So that would be awesome. I was like, I'm so happy. I was going to say at the beginning, but then I thought people would be like, oh, well, I'll ask my questions later. So no. So Commander, I'm going to give you the last word right now. And again, thank you from the bottom of my heart for being with me today. And I look forward to a whole bunch more streams with you.
Oh, thank you. I know a number of people asked questions that didn't get answered. I will look through the Discord channel, and any questions I see there that look like I didn't at least tangentially address, I will try to respond to them there. The only closing comment I would have beyond thank you for doing this is, as I do on the Shills show on Saturday every time, I'm going to sound like that broken record again and say, please contact your elected officials, both state, federal, and municipal, and urge them to continue to support Ukraine as they are capable of doing. It's very important, and honestly, if we don't want the current global situation to escalate, I think that's the way to do it. I hate to put it on the Ukrainians, but you know, as long as they're fighting the Russians and holding them back, it means that the rest of us aren't directly involved with the potential risk of a very, very dangerous escalation. So we need to support them to the fullest extent. Thanks.
Thank you, Commander. I do want to shout a couple last super chats we had. Generic username, he said for $2, excellent stream as always. Thank you, Shills. And Commander Prankster did a direct donation for $26.25. Thank you so much. And thank you for all your support. And thank you for being here, everyone. Just your time and sharing the channel and getting and winning over hearts and minds for Ukraine is so, so, so important. So we'll see you all on the next one.
To paraphrase Russell Crowe from The Gladiator, were you not entertained? Take care, sports fans.